1:17 a.m. The bedroom was dead quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Claire lay on the right side of the bed with her eyes closed, her body completely still. His breathing was very light, making it seem as if he were truly fast asleep. But the hand hidden beneath her blanket was gripping the bedsheet so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The man next to her moved. First, he rolled over very slowly, then paused for a few seconds, as if checking to see if she had woken up. Claire's heart leaped into her throat, but she still didn't dare to open her eyes. A moment later, the man quietly threw back the covers and got out of bed, his bare feet stepping onto the hardwood floor. His movements were chillingly smooth, as if he had done this countless times before. He walked over to the closet first, picked up the jacket he had draped over the back of a chair earlier, and then pulled a cell phone out from the bottom drawer of the nightstand. It was not the phone he normally used. Claire's heart sank heavily. Actually, she had known for a while, or more accurately, she had been suspicious for a while. Her husband, Mark, had started waking up quietly in the middle of the night about 2 weeks ago, disappearing for a couple of hours. Sometimes it was at 1 a.m., sometimes at 2 a.m. When he returned, he carried the faint smell of cigarette smoke and the scent of a cheap, unfamiliar perfume. At first, Claire thought he was just stressed from work, unable to sleep, and going out for a drive. Mark worked as a project manager at a residential remodeling firm. The housing market had been tough over the past couple of years, and his company was constantly piling on projects with tight deadlines. He worked late often. Claire felt bad for him and would even get up in the night to brew him a fresh pot of decaf or make him a cup of chamomile tea. But later, she noticed things were off. Every time Mark went out, he was extra careful. His phone was on silent, and he even took his keys off the bulky, clinking keychain he usually carried. When he came back, he would go straight to the bathroom to shower, only getting into bed after he was clean, as if he was afraid she would smell something. Once, Claire woke up in the middle of the night and heard low voices coming from the back patio. "Groggy," she sat up and called out his name. The voice on the patio stopped instantly. A few seconds later, Mark slid the glass door open and came in, wearing a smile. He asked if he woke her, saying there was an issue with a vendor's invoice and he had to return a call to the West Coast. Claire looked at the phone in his hand. The screen was lit up, but there was no active call screen on it. That night, she didn't expose his lie. She simply lay back down. Mark thought she fell for it, but he didn't know that from that moment on, a thorn had buried itself in her heart, one that could never be pulled out. They had been married for 8 years and had a 6-year-old daughter named Chloe. Claire always felt that her marriage wasn't some epic romance, but at least it was stable. She and Mark had met through mutual friends at a barbecue. Back then, Claire was 25, working as a front-end cashier at a local drugstore. She had a gentle personality, spoke softly, and had a pretty, natural face. Mark was 3 years older. He didn't come from money, but he looked honest and was a smooth talker. On their first date, Mark showed up wearing a faded blue button-down shirt, holding 2 to-go cups of coffee. Seeing her, he smiled a bit nervously, saying he didn't know what her regular order was, so he just got standard vanilla lattes, hoping he wouldn't mess up. That single sentence made Claire feel that this man was incredibly thoughtful. During the year they dated, Mark was genuinely good to her. He would bring her an umbrella on rainy days, bring her a heating pad and ibuprofen when she had cramps, and knowing she had a sensitive stomach, he always picked mild, healthy restaurants for their dates. After they got married, money was tight, but they pushed through step by step. The hardest time was right after Chloe was born. Mark was barely making $3,000 a month before taxes. Rent, baby formula, and diapers squeezed the life out of them. Before Claire had even fully recovered from childbirth, she started taking on remote customer service gigs online. After feeding the baby in the middle of the night, she would sit in front of her laptop replying to emails. Back then, Mark would hug her and swear that one day, when he got promoted, he would make sure she lived a comfortable life. Claire believed him. Later on, he did slowly climb the ladder, and his income increased. They moved into the 2-bedroom suburban apartment they were in now. Though it was a rental, it was on a good floor, had great natural light, and was close to Chloe's preschool. Claire kept the apartment spotless. There was always a potted pothos plant on the living room windowsill, a cheap but fresh bouquet of flowers from Trader Joe's on the dining table, and Chloe's crayon drawings covering the fridge door. She thought that as long as their family of 3 was safe and healthy, life would just keep getting better. But she didn't know exactly when Mark began to change. He started finding her annoying. Before, when Claire asked him what he wanted for dinner, he would smile and say he loved whatever she cooked. Now, He would just stare down at his phone and brush her off with a dismissive whatever. Before, the first thing he did when he got home was pick up his daughter and ask if she had fun at preschool. Now, he would walk through the door, complain about being exhausted, kick off his work boots, and collapse onto the sofa. Even when Chloe ran over to show him a drawing, he would just frown and tell her that Daddy was stressed and to stop making a fuss. It wasn't that Claire didn't feel hurt, but she always found excuses for him. He was too tired from work, the pressure was too high. Guys just get quieter as they reach their 30s. Until that one night, when she found a crumpled tissue in the washing machine. It had a lipstick stain on it. It wasn't her shade. Claire rarely wore makeup, and even when she occasionally put on lipstick, it was a subtle, dusty rose. The lipstick on that tissue was a bright, vibrant magenta. She stood in the laundry room, staring at that tissue for a very long time. The washing machine cycle finished with a loud beep, and the sound was so sharp it felt like it was smashing directly against her chest. When Mark came home that night, she placed the tissue on the kitchen island, keeping her voice as calm as possible. She asked what it was. Mark froze for a second, then quickly frowned, asking what she was talking about. She told him it was in his jacket pocket. Mark picked it up, glanced at it, and his face looked a bit unnatural, but he quickly laughed. He said he had taken a client out for drinks downtown, the whole table was packed, and someone must have grabbed the wrong napkin and stuffed it into his pocket by mistake. Claire asked if a napkin with lipstick could really stuff itself into his pocket. Mark suddenly raised his voice, asking if she could stop acting so crazy and paranoid over every little thing. He yelled that he worked his ass off out there every day, and when he came home, he had to be interrogated by her like a criminal, asking her if she thought this was a fun way to live. Claire was stunned by his shouting. She looked at this familiar yet completely foreign man in front of her, and suddenly, she couldn't say a single word. Seeing her silence, Mark felt even more justified. He told her that if she didn't trust him, there was nothing he could do, asking if they were even going to stay married if she acted like a psycho every day. That night, he slammed the door and went to sleep on the couch in the home office. Claire sat at the kitchen island, the dinner she made long cold. Chloe hid behind her bedroom door, asking in a small voice if Mommy and Daddy were mad at each other. Claire's eyes burned, but she forced a smile, telling her that Daddy was just tired from a long day. She hugged her daughter, gently rubbing her back, while her heart felt as if it was being slowly run through a shredder. From then on, Mark's midnight outings became more frequent. Claire tried asking him directly once, pointing out that he had been leaving the apartment a lot at night lately and asking if something was going on. Mark was lacing up his shoes and didn't even look up, saying the company had a major bid due, and he had to coordinate with an architect on a different schedule. Claire asked if he really had to go outside to do that. He replied that the kid was sleeping and she always complained about him keeping her awake when he took calls in the bedroom. Claire opened her mouth but didn't push it. She knew that if she kept asking, all she would get was a screaming match or an even sloppier lie. She started paying closer attention. Occasionally, there would be a long hair stuck to his fleece pullover, soft and slightly wavy. It wasn't hers. His iPhone passcode had changed from Chloe's birth year to a string of random numbers. He took his phone into the bathroom when he showered, and even kept it plugged in right under his pillow at night. One night, after Chloe was asleep, Mark was taking a call in the living room. Claire was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher, the water running on low. She heard Mark lower his voice and say to stop making a big deal out of it, that it wasn't a good time right now because she was watching him like a hawk. The plate in Claire's hand slipped, clattering loudly against the sink. Mark quickly hung up the phone. When he walked into the kitchen, he looked irritated. He asked what she was doing just standing there. Claire looked up at him and said she was doing the dishes, asking what he thought she was doing. Mark stared at her for a few seconds, then let out a cold laugh, telling Claire that her passive-aggressive attitude was getting really old. After that night, Claire stopped asking. She started pretending she didn't notice a thing. She cooked as usual, drove Chloe to school as usual, and asked him how traffic was when he got off work as usual. Only in her heart, she had quietly made a decision. She was going to see for herself exactly where he went every night. This decision terrified her, but it also woke her up. She refused to be the blind, naive housewife kept forever in the dark. Even if the truth destroyed her, she had to know. So on this night, she tucked her daughter into bed just like always, and left the hallway light on for Mark. It was past 10 p.m. when he got home, reeking of draft beer. He didn't even glance at her when he walked in, heading straight for the master bath. Claire stood in the kitchen, putting away leftovers, listening to the shower running, her chest feeling completely hollowed out. When Mark came out of the shower and saw the Tupperware on the counter, his tone was flat. He said he didn't want any, that he had grabbed a burger earlier. Claire nodded. He seemed a bit surprised by her lack of reaction. He didn't ask further, just shot her a look, noting that she was awfully quiet tonight. Claire looked down, wiping the counters, and simply said she had a headache. Mark said nothing more, grabbed his phone, and went into the bedroom. At 11:30 p.m., they both got into bed. Mark turned his back to her and soon stopped moving, but Claire kept her eyes wide open, staring at the faint sliver of moonlight bleeding through the blinds. She knew he wasn't asleep. His breathing was far too calculated, too even. Sure enough, at 1:17 a.m., Mark got up. Claire kept her eyes shut tight, listening to him pull on his jeans, grab his keys, and crack the door open. It wasn't until she heard the soft click of the deadbolt locking that her eyes snapped open. The room was empty. She sat up, her heart pounding so fast she could feel it in her throat. She threw off the covers, grabbed her sneakers, and checked on her deeply sleeping daughter. She whispered that Mommy would be right back, pulled a dark hoodie over her shoulders, grabbed her phone, and slipped out the door. The apartment breezeway was freezing. Afraid her footsteps would echo, she walked lightly on the balls of her feet. When she reached the ground floor, she looked through the glass lobby doors and saw Mark's silhouette already walking down the sidewalk, away from the complex. He didn't get into his truck. That made Claire even more certain that wherever he was going, it was within walking distance. She didn't dare follow too closely, keeping a safe half-block behind him. The streetlights flickered with a dim orange glow, and the strip mall across the street was completely dark. Occasionally, a car would speed past the intersection, the sound of its tires hissing over the asphalt. Mark walked with purpose, like he was running late. Claire pulled her hood up and followed. The cold wind bit at her face, but she didn't feel the chill. She only felt the thick layer of nervous sweat coating her palms. She followed him for 3 blocks until he turned into an older, slightly run-down apartment complex called Oak Ridge. The vinyl siding was peeling, the security gate was permanently propped open, and the parking lot was poorly lit. Claire had never been here before. Mark walked up to Building 3. Claire stood near a dumpster, staring up at the stairwell, her legs suddenly feeling like cement. She was suddenly terrified to follow him up. If it really was what she thought it was, what was her game plan? Scream, cry, start a fistfight, or turn around, walk back home, and pretend she never left her bed? She thought of her daughter Chloe. She thought of their 8 years of marriage. She thought of the expensive Carhartt jacket she had saved up to buy for Mark for Christmas. She thought of the day they signed the lease on their first apartment, when Mark hugged her and promised he would give her the world. Tears pooled in her eyes without warning, but she still forced herself toward the stairs. There was no elevator. The stairwell smelled faintly of stale smoke and bleach. She gripped the metal handrail and walked up, flight by flight. The second floor was dead quiet. On the third floor, a sliver of light leaked from beneath apartment 3B. She heard faint voices. Her sneakers stopped squeaking against the concrete. It was Mark's voice. It was incredibly soft, almost soothing. He was telling someone to stop being mad, saying that he was here now, wasn't he? Claire stood on the landing, her entire body paralyzed. She hadn't heard Mark use that tone of voice in years. At home, Mark was perpetually impatient, exhausted, and easily irritated. Yet right now, his voice carried a coaxing, affectionate warmth. Another woman's voice sounded, whining and full of attitude. She complained that he always promised he would stay the night, but always left after a couple of hours. She demanded to know if she was just supposed to be his dirty little secret, asking when exactly he was going to file the divorce papers. A loud ringing exploded in Claire's ears. She had to brace her hand against the stucco wall to keep her balance. The door wasn't fully latched. It was cracked open just an inch. From her angle on the landing, she had a clear line of sight into the entryway. A warm lamp was lit in the cramped living room. Mark stood next to a cheap futon, wearing the exact hoodie she had bought him. Sitting in front of him was a woman in a silk nightgown, her hair completely down. Claire recognized her instantly. It was Jessica, the administrative assistant from Mark's regional office. Claire had met her once at the company Christmas party last year. Mark had brought Claire along, and Jessica had been sitting at the open bar, her makeup flawless, her smile incredibly sweet. She had even walked over with a cocktail in hand, telling Claire that she was so gorgeous and that Mark never stopped bragging about her at the office. At the time, Claire had blushed and asked what he said about her. Jessica had looked at Mark, flashing a very knowing smirk, and said that he always talked about how well she held down the fort at home, letting him focus entirely on his career. Thinking back on that interaction now, it felt like a physical punch to the gut. Inside the apartment, Jessica grabbed Mark's hand, dropping her voice. She reminded him that he promised to leave his wife as soon as the downtown condo project was finalized. Now, the project was wrapped. She asked if he just couldn't bring himself to leave her. Mark fell silent. Claire stared through the crack, still clutching onto a pathetic, laughable shred of hope. She prayed he would say no, hoped he would push the woman away, hoped he felt even a microscopic ounce of guilt. But Mark just let out a heavy sigh and reached out to run his fingers through Jessica's hair. He said it wasn't that he couldn't bear to leave her, but that a divorce right now would wreck him financially. Chloe was still young, rent was insane, and he had maxed out his credit cards on the new truck. He said he needed time to get his ducks in a row. Jessica scoffed, asking what that made her. She said she had been waiting around for months, sitting up every night just for him to sneak over. She asked if she looked like someone who deserved to be a side piece. Mark told her to stop stressing and pulled her into a hug. He said his heart was with her, and that his wife was just his kid's mom at this point. He said the spark had been dead for years. The spark had been dead for years. She was just his kid's mom. Those two sentences were like serrated blades plunging violently into Claire's chest. She stood outside the door, her vision blurring. Her throat felt blocked by concrete, making it agonizing just to pull air into her lungs. 8 years of marriage, countless days of grinding through bills, budgeting, and raising a child, and in the end, she was reduced to nothing but his kid's mom. She remembered everything she had sacrificed to keep their heads above water. The year Mark got his first project manager gig, he was constantly entertaining contractors, coming home totally wasted. It was Claire who dragged his dead weight through the door at 2 a.m., wiping his face and throwing his clothes in the wash. When his mom had a stroke, Claire burned through all her PTO to take care of her, driving back and forth to the rehab center, cooking meals, and running herself ragged. When he messed up a vendor order and got written up, he sat out on the balcony chain-smoking in a panic. It was Claire who pulled up her own savings account and told him it was okay, that they would figure it out together. She thought that was what a partnership meant, but in his heart it was just an arrangement of convenience. The two people inside were still talking. Jessica leaned against Mark's chest, her voice softening, begging him to just crash there for the whole night. Mark hesitated, saying he couldn't risk it. He said Claire had been acting super paranoid lately and he had to be back in bed by 2:30. Jessica pouted, asking if he was scared of his wife. Mark laughed a little, saying it wasn't fear, but that he couldn't afford to blow up his life yet. He said she seemed sweet, but if she got a lawyer involved right now, it would be a total bloodbath. Plus, he needed her to handle Chloe's school schedule. Claire almost let out a hysterical laugh. So, the reason he wouldn't ask for a divorce wasn't out of love. It wasn't out of commitment to his family. It was simply because she was free childcare and a live-in maid. She managed his life so he could safely play the bachelor out in the real world. Jessica gave a dramatic humph, saying he was just full of excuses. Mark kissed her forehead, asking when he had ever lied to her, promising that once he got his finances straight, he would marry her. Claire couldn't stomach another second. Her stomach violently churned. Hot, angry tears spilled over her eyelashes. She clamped both hands over her mouth to muffle her sobs, spun around, and stumbled down the concrete stairs. But just as she hit the second-floor landing, her iPhone suddenly buzzed with a loud Amber Alert in her pocket. The emergency alarm echoed sharply against the cinder block walls. Claire stiffened in pure terror, frantically fumbling to silence the phone. The door upstairs yanked open. Mark's voice rang out, sharp and suspicious. "Who's out there?" Claire held her breath, instantly flattening herself against the darkest corner of the stairwell beneath the stairs. Heavy footsteps began coming down. Her heart was hammering so violently the blood was roaring in her ears. Mark stood on the landing between the third and second floors, leaning over the rail, scanning the darkness. The shadows were deep, and he didn't spot her. Jessica called out from the doorway asking what was going on. Mark frowned, saying he thought he heard someone in the hall. Jessica told him he was being paranoid, pointing out that it was a sketchy complex and people were always making noise. Mark stared down for a few more excruciating seconds, before finally turning around and walking back up. The door clicked shut, followed by the slide of a chain lock. Claire slumped against the wall, her legs turning to jelly. She looked down at her screen. It was an automated reminder from the kindergarten parent portal. "Don't forget to pack craft supplies for tomorrow's project." In that exact moment, she completely shattered. She didn't break down because of the cheating husband upstairs. She broke down because of the notification on her screen reminding her to pack construction paper, glue sticks, and safety scissors. Her reality was still so relentlessly exhausting, so completely mundane. In a few hours, she still had to get up and pack a lunchbox. She still had to sit in the school drop-off line. She still had to smile and wave at the crossing guards, but her marriage had been brutally executed in the middle of the night. Claire didn't know how she managed to walk back to her own apartment. The night air was freezing, making the tear tracks on her face feel tight and numb. She walked the 3 blocks back like a ghost. The streets were dead. Only the streetlights stretched her shadow out across the pavement. When she unlocked her front door, the living room was just as she had left it. Chloe was sleeping soundly, her little chest rising and falling, hugging her faded stuffed bunny. Claire sat on the edge of the mattress looking at her, and the tears started falling all over again. She brushed the hair out of her daughter's face, repeatedly asking herself, "What do I do? If I file for divorce, how will this wreck her? If I don't, how the hell am I supposed to look at that man every single day for the rest of my life?" At 2:40 a.m., the deadbolt clicked. Claire quickly wiped her face dry, slid under the covers, and shut her eyes. Mark was back. He walked into the master bathroom and turned on the shower. Just like always. The pipes groaned for a long time, so long that Claire felt like she was drowning in the sound. After he turned the water off, he slid into bed. He smelled heavily of Old Spice body wash, but it still couldn't mask the lingering trace of Jessica's perfume. The second his head hit the pillow, Claire spoke into the dark. "Where were you?" Mark's entire body went rigid. A few seconds later, with obvious irritation in his tone, he said, "You're still awake?" Claire opened her eyes, staring blankly at the ceiling fan. "I asked where you went." Mark immediately went on the defensive, claiming he had to go back to the site office. Claire asked what kind of emergency required him to be on site at 1 a.m. Mark huffed, saying he already told her it was a vendor crisis. Claire slowly rolled her head to look at him. In the dim glow of the room, Mark's face flashed with momentary panic, but he quickly masked it with anger. He asked her what she was trying to pick a fight about now. She looked at him and felt a deep, chilling disgust. This man was a complete stranger. Just an hour ago, he was promising to marry another woman. His alibi was a joke, yet he could lie right next to her, look her in the eye, and gaslight her without skipping a beat. Claire didn't yell. She simply asked Mark if he remembered his vows from their wedding day. Mark let out a harsh sigh, asking why she was acting psycho in the middle of the night. She said, "You promised me you would always tell me the truth." Mark went dead silent. Claire let out a hollow, broken laugh. She asked him if he had the guts to look her in the eye and say he was telling the truth right now. Mark sat up, keeping his voice in a harsh whisper so he wouldn't wake Chloe. He demanded to know what she was getting at, asking if she had been going through his iPad or listening to office gossip. Claire sat up too. She didn't scream. She didn't throw her phone at him. She just sat there, looking right through him, and said, word by word, "Mark, I followed you tonight." Mark's face lost all its color. The oxygen in the room seemed to evaporate. He stared at her, his jaw working, but no sound came out. Claire watched him, the absolute last ember of hope in her chest burning out. If he had panicked, if he had broken down crying, if he had said, "I am so sorry," her decision might have been harder. But the very first words out of Mark's mouth were, "You followed me?" His tone wasn't remorseful. It was furious. Claire blinked, then suddenly laughed until tears streamed down her face. "Yeah, Mark, I followed you," she said, her voice eerily calm. "So I saw everything. I saw you walk right into Jessica's apartment. I saw you holding her. I heard you tell her I was just your kid's mom. I heard you say the spark was dead." Mark's face shifted from pale white to a flushed, angry red. He instinctively shot a look toward the bedroom door and hissed, "Keep your damn voice down." Claire stared daggers into him. "Are you worried Chloe will hear? Or are you just terrified I'm going to expose what a fraud you are?" Mark rubbed his face hard, like he was trying to figure out an angle. "Claire, listen to me. It's not what you think." "Then what is it, Mark?" Mark stammered, running a hand through his hair. "Me and Jessica, things just got a little out of hand lately. It's just a phase." Claire leaned forward. "A phase? You sneak out at 1 a.m., climb into her bed, and promise to marry her, and you're calling it a phase?" Mark was completely backed into a corner. Claire watched him, her heart turning to pure ice. After a heavy silence, Mark finally muttered that he admitted he messed up. But then he immediately shifted gears, his tone becoming defensive. He told her she needed to take a hard look at why he felt the need to leave in the first place. He complained that all she ever cared about was meal prepping and the PTA, and that she never asked about his stress at work. He said he carried the financial weight of the whole house, and when he came home, he just wanted to chill, but she was always nagging him about chores and spending time with Chloe. He demanded to know if she had any idea how suffocating that was. Claire looked at him, her chest physically aching. So, you slept with your admin because I cook your meals, raise your child, and ask you to be a father? Mark scowled, saying that wasn't what he meant. Then what did you mean? She asked. Was I not dressing up enough for you? Was I not acting like Jessica? Waiting up in lingerie in the middle of the night to stroke your ego? Do you have to make it sound so trashy? Mark growled. Trashy? Her tears finally spilled over, but she refused to look away. What you did was trashy, Mark. Stating the facts doesn't make it worse. Mark's face darkened completely. The master bedroom was terrifyingly quiet. From the hallway, the sound of the ice maker dropping cubes into the freezer tray made them both jump. Claire immediately clamped her mouth shut, wiping her eyes furiously. She suddenly felt pathetic. She was the victim here. She was the one who was betrayed. Yet even as her world was ending, her very first instinct was to keep the peace so she didn't disrupt the house. For 8 years, she had always been like this, walking on eggshells so Mark wouldn't be stressed, bending over backwards so his family liked her, putting her own career on hold so he could shine. She had put everyone else's comfort first, completely forgetting that she was allowed to be angry, that she was allowed to demand respect. Mark stayed silent for a long time before his tone finally shifted into damage control mode. He told Claire he was sorry, but asked her not to do anything crazy or blow this out of proportion. Claire looked at him. Are you afraid I'm going to file for divorce? Mark shook his head, saying it wasn't about fear, it was just common sense. He reminded her they had a life together. Chloe was about to start first grade. He asked if she really wanted to traumatize her kid over a stupid mistake. The mention of Chloe made Claire's heart physically drop. Mark sensed her hesitation and immediately moved in, lowering his voice into that smooth, persuasive tone he used on clients. He claimed Jessica meant nothing to him, that he got caught up in the ego boost, and that he would cut it off immediately. He asked her to give him a few months of counseling to prove he could fix this. If this had happened a year ago, Claire might have caved. She wanted the American dream so badly, the intact family, the dad at the soccer games, the stability. Society constantly told women that men make mistakes, that you have to fight for your marriage, that it's cheaper to stay to keep the kids in a good school district. But the audio recording of his voice in that stairwell was playing on a loop in her brain. She's just my kid's mom. The spark is dead. I need her to handle Chloe's schedule. Those words proved Mark wasn't having a moment of weakness. He had calculated the logistics and decided she was too convenient to lose. He knew he couldn't afford to pay alimony and child support, so he was trying to trap her. She wiped the last tear off her cheek. When she spoke, her voice was so cold it didn't even sound like her own. Didn't you promise to marry her? Claire asked. I'll make it easy for you. Mark flinched. What are you talking about? I want a divorce. Mark's jaw literally dropped. He looked like he had just been slapped. He had always viewed Claire as submissive, the kind of wife who would cry but eventually stay. It took him several seconds to recover. He told her she was acting hysterical. She looked him dead in the eye. I've never been more clear-headed in my life. Clear-headed? Mark's temper flared again. He asked Claire if she had any concept of what a divorce actually cost in this economy. He reminded her they didn't own the apartment, their savings account was a joke, and inflation was killing them. He pointed out she was working part-time at a drugstore making $15 an hour, demanding to know how she planned to afford a lawyer, let alone rent, on that paycheck. Claire felt a sharp stab of panic, because he was right. Over the years, because daycare was too expensive, she had taken the career hit. When Chloe was a toddler and constantly getting sick at daycare, Claire was the one who called out. The drugstore could only offer her part-time flex shifts. Mark had always told her it didn't make sense for her to work full-time since her paycheck would just go straight to childcare anyway. She had sacrificed her earning power to raise his child, and now he was using her financial vulnerability as a weapon against her. But this time, Claire didn't back down. She looked at Mark and told him that even if she had to work 3 jobs, she refused to share a bed with a man who was sleeping with his coworker. Mark's eyes turned ice cold. He told her if she wanted to blow up their lives, fine. But he warned her that there was no way a judge would give primary custody to a part-time cashier when he was the one making 6 figures. He said he could hire a shark of a lawyer and bury her in court fees. He asked her what exactly she planned to fight him with. That threat severed the last emotional tie Claire had to him. She thought Mark would at least have the decency to feel guilty. Instead, his immediate reaction was to financially bully her into submission. Claire didn't say another word. She grabbed a spare comforter out of the linen closet, threw her pillow under her arm, and walked toward the door. Mark stood by the bed, his face flushed with anger, asking where the hell she was going. Without turning around, she said she was sleeping in Chloe's room. Claire didn't sleep a wink that night. She lay on the trundle bed next to her daughter, watching the moonlight on Chloe's face, feeling a crushing weight on her chest. She wanted to scream into her pillow, but she choked the sobs down so she wouldn't wake her. At 5 a.m., she grabbed her phone, opened her notes app, and started typing. She documented everything: the dates of his late nights, the lipstick, the phone calls, the exact address of Oak Ridge Apartments, and the quotes she heard. She didn't know how divorce court worked yet, but she knew she couldn't afford to be naive anymore. At 6:30 a.m., her iPhone alarm went off. Claire silenced it, walked into the kitchen, and started the coffee maker. She scrambled some eggs, popped Eggos in the toaster, and poured a glass of orange juice for Chloe. Her routine was exactly the same as any other Tuesday, except her eyes were completely dead. When Mark walked out of the master bedroom, dressed in his work polos and khakis, there were dark bags under his eyes. Seeing Claire making breakfast, he let out a visible breath of relief. Clearly assuming she had slept off her tantrum and was falling back in line, Chloe padded out of her room in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes and asking for Daddy. Claire immediately knelt down, smoothed her messy hair, and told her to go brush her teeth so they wouldn't be late for the drop-off line. She reminded her she had packed the glue sticks in her backpack. Chloe nodded, then looked up at Mark, asking if Daddy could take her to school today. Mark opened his mouth, clearly about to say he had an early meeting, but Claire shot him a look so sharp it made him snap his mouth shut. He forced a strained smile and told Chloe he would love to take her. Chloe cheered and ran to the bathroom. Claire went back to flipping the eggs, ignoring him entirely. During breakfast, Mark tried to make small talk, asking about the weather forecast, but Claire gave him one-word answers. She only focused on reminding Chloe to use her napkin. The total freeze-out made Mark far more nervous than if she were screaming. Before walking out the door with Chloe, Mark stopped in the entryway, lowered his voice, and told Claire they needed to talk like adults tonight. Claire didn't look up from loading the dishwasher. Fine. That morning, Claire called out sick from the drugstore. She didn't go back to bed. Instead, she drove straight to a local family law attorney's office she had found on Google. When she sat in the waiting room, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely fill out the intake forms. She was called back by an attorney named Miss Barnes, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense vibe. Miss Barnes spoke professionally but kindly. At first, Claire was able to outline the situation objectively, but when she got to the part about standing in the stairwell, her voice cracked. Miss Barnes didn't rush her. She just pushed a box of Kleenex across the desk and poured her a cup of water from a pitcher. Once Claire caught her breath, Miss Barnes gave it to her straight. She said the absolute worst thing Claire could do right now was tip her hand or start a war before she was prepared. Miss Barnes asked the hard questions. What's in the joint checking account? Is his name the only one on the lease? Does he have a 401 kick? Do you have hard proof of the infidelity, like texts or hotel receipts? The questions were brutally practical. Claire realized very quickly that in America, a divorce isn't a dramatic movie scene where you just pack a bag and leave. It's a legal and financial dismantling of a corporation. She had to secure her housing, her income, and her custody rights. Claire answered as best as she could. Miss Barnes gave her a checklist. Do not move out of the apartment that can be seen as abandoning the child. Pull the last 3 years of tax returns. Get screenshots of the joint bank account. If Mark agreed to an uncontested divorce, she could file for primary physical custody and fair alimony, considering she paused her career for their child. If he tried to hide assets or play dirty, they would subpoena his bank records and drag Jessica into a deposition. Walking out of that office clutching a folder of legal advice, Claire felt a terrifying reality check, but for the first time, she didn't feel powerless. She drove straight to the drugstore. Her manager, Sarah, was organizing the seasonal aisle. Seeing Claire looking like a ghost, Sarah asked if she needed to go to urgent care. Claire opened her mouth to say she just had a migraine, but the wall she had built up completely crumbled, and she started crying right there in aisle 4. Sarah immediately pulled her into the employee break room and locked the door. Claire poured the whole story out. Sarah, a tough, working-class mom herself, turned bright red with anger. She said she always thought Mark was a decent guy, but he was just another deadbeat. She told Claire not to stress about the job. The pharmacy actually had an opening for a full-time pharmacy technician trainee. Sarah said if Claire wanted it, she would fast-track her application with corporate, get her full-time hours, and put her on the path to get certified. Claire was shocked, wiping her eyes. But I have to do the school pickups at 3. Sarah waved her hand. We'll work around it. You can do the early morning shifts and alternate weekends. I've got your back. Look at me, Claire. When a woman is backed into a corner, you have to secure your own bag. Having your own paycheck is the only leverage you get in this world. Claire memorized those words. When she picked Chloe up from the elementary school that afternoon, Chloe showed her a messy construction paper house covered in glitter. Looking at her daughter's proud, missing two front teeth smile, Claire's heart physically ached, but she forced a massive grin and told her it was ready for an art museum. Back at the apartment, Claire made spaghetti just like always. Mark didn't walk in until 7 p.m. He was holding a plastic container of strawberries from the expensive organic market down the street, a peace offering. He set them on the counter, saying he knew they were her favorite. Claire was draining the pasta and didn't even turn around. Put them in the fridge. Mark stood awkwardly in the kitchen for a second, then muttered an apology for being a jerk last night. Claire turned off the faucet, dried her hands, and looked at him. She pointed toward the living room where Bluey was playing on the TV. We talk after she's asleep. Mark nodded and backed off. The vibe during dinner was suffocatingly polite. Chloe, oblivious to the nuclear bomb ticking under her parents' marriage, forced Mark to play a board game with her after eating. Mark, clearly trying to win Husband of the Year points, played along with forced enthusiasm, constantly checking Claire's reaction. Claire just sat on the armchair scrolling through her phone, indifferent. Once Chloe was tucked into bed, Claire walked out to the living room. Mark was sitting on the couch, the TV turned off, 2 glasses of iced water on the coffee table. He immediately launched into his pitch. He said he had been sick to his stomach all day, that he loved his family, and that he refused to get a divorce. Claire sat in the accent chair across from him. And what about Jessica? Mark swore he was cutting her off completely. When? Mark hesitated. I have to figure out how to transition her to a different department so she doesn't go to HR and ruin my career. I need a couple of weeks to smooth it over. Claire let out a dark laugh. Do you need a couple of weeks to talk it over with HR? Or do you need a couple of weeks to figure out how to hide her better? Mark's face tightened. Do you have to be so cynical? How do you want me to act, Mark? Do you want me to smile and nod and tell you boys will be boys? Do you want me to thank you for staying for the sake of the kid? Mark ran his hands over his face. I'm not saying that, but that's exactly what you want. Mark leaned forward, putting his elbows on his knees. He said he knew she was hurt, but they had 8 years of history. He said she couldn't just throw away a marriage over a stupid mistake he made when he was stressed. A mistake? Claire stared right through him. How long have you been sleeping with her? Mark looked away, studying the rug. It hasn't been long. How long? 2, maybe 3 months. Claire calmly picked up her phone, unlocked it, and pulled up a photo from her camera roll. It was a picture of 2 movie ticket stubs she had found in the pocket of his golf bag while doing laundry last month. The timestamp was from 4 months ago. She slid the phone across the glass coffee table. 4 months ago, you told me you were at a regional conference in Dallas, she stated. Mark stared at the screen, his face dropping. Claire swiped to the next photo. It was a receipt from a high-end women's boutique at the mall. It was for a silk dress. The size was an XS. Claire was a medium. You told me that charge was for a client gift basket. You bought her a dress? Mark's lips pressed into a tight white line. Claire didn't raise her voice. I am going to ask you one last time. How long have you been lying to my face? The only sound in the apartment was the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Mark looked at the floor and whispered, 6 months. 6 months. It felt like a baseball bat to the ribs. For half a year, every time he came home late, every time she made excuses for him being tired, every time she convinced herself she was just being insecure, he was making a fool out of her. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and when she opened them, any trace of the woman who used to love him was dead. I'm not going to scream at you, Mark, she said, her voice eerily corporate. I want an uncontested divorce. I want primary physical custody of Chloe. You will pay state-mandated child support. We will split the 401 KEK and savings 50/50, and you will pay alimony since I derailed my career for this family. Mark's head snapped up. Absolutely not. Claire didn't blink. Then my lawyer will file the paperwork on Monday and we can do this the hard way. Mark jumped up from the couch, his anger boiling over. He asked who the hell she thought she was. He mocked her, asking if she really thought a judge was going to give her everything just because she heard him talking in a hallway. He pointed his finger at her, saying she had no hard proof, no smoking gun, and that a family court judge would laugh her part-time minimum wage ass out of the courtroom. Claire's hands were shaking, but she looked up at him with absolute venom. I will get the proof. Mark scoffed, a truly ugly, arrogant sound. He told her to go ahead and try. He reminded her he made the real money. He said he could afford a place in a great school district, while she'd be stuck in a studio apartment. He asked her how she expected to win a custody war against a guy with an $80,000 salary when she could barely afford groceries. Looking at him, Claire felt a wave of absolute revulsion. For 8 years, she had loved his ambition. She had rubbed his shoulders when he was stressed about bids. She had managed his entire personal life so he could climb the corporate ladder. And the second he decided he was done with her, he weaponized the very career she had helped him build to threaten her child. The conversation was over. Mark stormed into the bedroom and slammed the door. Claire sat alone in the dark living room until 2 a.m. before silently going into Chloe's room to sleep. For the next week, Mark played the role of the perfect suburban dad. He was home by 5:30 p.m. He cooked dinner. He took Chloe to the park. He even posted a throwback photo of the three of them at a pumpkin patch on his Instagram with the caption, "Family is everything." To the outside world, he was father of the year. Claire knew he was just doing damage control, terrified she was building a case. She didn't confront him. Following Miss Barnes's instructions, she spent her days quietly pulling up bank statements, PDF copies of their lease, Chloe's medical records, and credit card statements. With every spreadsheet she downloaded, the fog in her brain cleared. She realized she wasn't worthless. She had been the CFO of their household. She knew exactly where every dime went. A week later, the standoff broke. Claire had just put Chloe down for the night when her phone lit up with an iMessage from an unsaved number. "Is this Claire?" "It's Jessica." Claire stared at the blue bubble, her stomach dropping. The typing indicator flashed and a second message popped up. "We need to talk. I'm done hiding." Claire was about to block the number, but then a photo came through. It was a selfie of Mark and Jessica, kissing. The background was the Oak Ridge apartment. There was a mini cake on the counter with a candle in it. Claire's grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles ached. Another text followed. "He loves me. He's only stalling the divorce because he doesn't want to pay alimony. You holding on is just embarrassing for everyone." Instead of crying, a cold, calculating calm washed over Claire. She typed back a time and the address of a 2-4-hour diner down the highway. When Claire walked into the neon-lit diner, Jessica was already sitting in a vinyl booth by the window. She was wearing a beige trench coat, her hair styled perfectly, looking like she was ready for an Instagram photo shoot. She looked much younger and much more aggressive than she had in the apartment. Seeing Claire slide into the booth across from her, Jessica gave a tight, patronizing smile. "Hey." Claire set her purse on the table. "Drop the pleasantries. You wanted to talk? Talk." Jessica's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms. She said Mark had warned her Claire was a lot more stubborn than she looked. Claire didn't react. She casually slipped her phone out of her pocket, hit the voice memo record button, and set it face down on the Formica table. Jessica stirred her iced water with lemon, putting on a faux sympathetic face. She said she knew this sucked, but you can't help who you fall in love with. She said she and Mark had a real, deep connection. Claire looked at her deadpan. "A deep connection? Is that what you call a guy who won't even let you post a picture of him on social media?" Jessica frowned, her tone sharpening. She said Mark told her his marriage was basically a roommate situation, that they hadn't been intimate in a year, and that he was only staying until Chloe was older. Claire had already heard this script. It hurt, but she didn't flinch. She just asked, "How long has it been?" Jessica, desperate to prove she was the priority, immediately fired back, "Almost 8 months. He pursued me. He told me his house was miserable, that you didn't understand his ambitions, and that going home to you felt like a chore. 8 months. Mark had lied to both of them." Claire nodded slowly. "What else?" Thinking she had the upper hand, Jessica leaned in, her voice dripping with arrogance. She said Mark promised to file the paperwork by Christmas so they could move in together. She bragged that she had already met his buddies from the softball league, and they all knew they were a couple. Claire leaned back against the vinyl seat. "If you're so confident he's choosing you, call him right now and tell him to come down here and say it to my face." Jessica hesitated, her bravado slipping for a second. Claire didn't wait. She picked up her phone, paused the recording, and dialed Mark. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and tense. "What's wrong?" "I'm at the Denny's on Route 9. Jessica is sitting across from me," Claire said flatly. "Get down here now." Dead silence on the line. A few seconds later, Mark panicked, his voice a harsh whisper. "Are you out of your mind? Do not talk to her. I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, the diner door chimed and Mark practically sprinted inside. He looked like he was going to throw up. Seeing his wife and his mistress sitting in the same booth, his eyes darted around the restaurant like a trapped animal. Jessica immediately stood up from the booth. Mark, tell her you love me and you're filing for divorce. Mark stood paralyzed in the aisle. Claire didn't move. She just looked up at him and said, We're waiting, Mark. Jessica's eyes welled with angry tears. Say it! Mark looked at Jessica, then at Claire, sweat beading on his forehead. He swallowed hard, ran a hand over his face, and muttered, Jess, stop. Just go home. This is between me and my wife. Jessica stared at him, the color completely draining from her face. What did you just say? Mark wouldn't meet her eyes. He mumbled that he promised he would figure things out, but she was out of line for contacting Claire and she needed to leave. In that split second, the illusion shattered for Jessica. She realized that when forced to choose out in the open, Mark was too much of a coward to stand by her. The epic romance he sold her was a cheap fantasy that only existed behind closed blinds. Jessica let out a harsh, bitter laugh, and a tear streaked her perfect makeup. You absolute liar. Mark stepped closer, grabbing her arm. Jess, drop it, you're making a scene. That was the match that lit the powder keg. Jessica yanked her arm away, furiously grabbed her phone from her purse, unlocked it, and slammed it down onto the table right in front of Claire. She swiped frantically, pulling up screenshots of texts, Venmo receipts, and hotel bookings. You want proof? Take it, Jessica yelled, not caring who was staring. He paid half my rent in October, have Venmo'd me for a weekend in Napa. He texted me 100 times that he was calling a lawyer. He said you were a glorified babysitter. Claire, you think I'm the loser here? You're married to a sociopath. Mark's face twisted in pure panic. He lunged across the table, trying to snatch the phone, yelling, Jessica, shut the hell up. But Claire was faster. She slammed her hand down over Jessica's phone, pinning it to the table. Her fingers were ice cold, but her adrenaline was surging. She wasn't having a breakdown. The breakdown had happened in the Oak Ridge stairwell. Right now, she was just collecting the evidence to execute him in court. With her free hand, Claire used her own phone to snap crystal-clear pictures of the Venmo receipts, the explicit texts, and the hotel confirmations displayed on Jessica's screen. Mark panicked, grabbing at Claire's wrists. Claire, what the hell are you doing? Stop! Claire shoved his hand away and looked him dead in the eye. I'm getting the proof you told me I didn't have. Mark stumbled back, his bravado entirely gone. He started babbling, saying Jessica was a crazy stalker, that she was doctoring texts, that she was emotionally unstable. Jessica screamed at him, calling him a piece of garbage, asking how dare he call her crazy after he begged her to be with him. A waitress and 2 truckers in the corner booth were staring openly at them. Claire calmly finished taking photos, slid her phone into her purse, and stood up. She looked at Mark, her voice carrying over the diner music. I will have my lawyer email yours on Monday morning. If you try to fight me on the house or custody, these receipts go straight to the judge and then I'm forwarding them to your VP of operations. Without waiting for a response, she walked out the door into the cool night air. It had started drizzling. The rain hit her face, cold and sharp. Walking to her car, Claire didn't feel the dramatic, triumphant high you see in movies. She just felt exhausted to her bones. Securing the divorce wasn't the finish line. It was the starting gun for having to rebuild her entire life from scratch. The next 2 months were brutal. Mark went through all the stages of grief. First, he tried the remorse angle, showing up at the apartment with flowers, crying, promising to go to church, saying he was blocking Jessica on everything. Claire just looked at him and asked, If I hadn't followed you that night, would you be standing here apologizing right now? Mark couldn't answer. Then, he went scorched earth. He hired an aggressive lawyer, threatened to bankrupt her in discovery, and swore he would fight for 50/50 custody just to avoid paying child support. Claire didn't engage. She let Miss Barnes handle it. Armed with the Venmo records and proof of marital funds spent on an affair, Miss Barnes tore Mark's lawyer apart in mediation. Meanwhile, Claire officially accepted the full-time pharmacy tech trainee position. The schedule was grueling. Waking up at 5:30 a.m., doing the drop-off, standing on her feet for 8 hours dispensing meds, rushing to after-school care, cooking dinner, and studying flashcards until midnight. She was exhausted, living off caffeine and anxiety. But Sarah, her manager, kept her word, giving her stable shifts so she never missed a school pickup. Her coworkers covered for her when Chloe got a fever. Claire realized that the narrative she had believed for 8 years that she was too weak to survive without a man's salary was a lie. She could budget, she could negotiate, she could assemble IKEA furniture, and she could reset the Wi-Fi router by herself. Eventually, Mark folded. Not out of the goodness of his heart, but because Jessica, angry and humiliated, had anonymously emailed screenshots of their texts to several people in Mark's regional office. While corporate didn't officially fire him, he became radioactive. His boss pulled him off a major commercial bid. He was too stressed trying to save his job to keep fighting a losing legal battle. The day they signed the final decree, the sun was shining. Claire wore a sharp navy blazer and jeans, her hair blown out. She had lost a little weight, but the heavy, exhausted shadow that used to hang over her eyes was gone. Mark sat across the conference table, looking 10 years older, a bitter scowl on his face. When it was over, he caught her in the parking lot. Claire. She stopped with her hand on her car door. Mark looked at her, a flicker of genuine regret breaking through his anger. Was there really no coming back from this? Claire looked at the man she used to love. I gave you 100 chances to come back, Mark. Every time I asked you why you were late, every time I found a receipt, every time I begged you to just talk to me, I wanted to save this family more than anything. She paused. It's not that I wouldn't let you come back. It's that you burned the bridge down while you were standing on it. Mark's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing red. He muttered that he would still be a damn good father to Chloe, and got into his truck. After the house was sold and the assets split, Claire and Chloe moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment near the pharmacy. It was a massive downgrade. The kitchen counter doubled as a dining table, and Claire slept on a pull-out sofa in the living room so Chloe could have the bedroom. But it had a little patio where she grew tomatoes, and it was entirely theirs. On the first night, while unpacking boxes, Chloe clutched her stuffed bunny and asked quietly, Mommy, is Daddy ever going to live with us again? Claire sat cross-legged on the carpet, took her daughter's hands, and looked her right in the eye. No, sweetie. Mommy and Daddy are going to live in different houses from now on. But Daddy loves you so much, and Mommy loves you so much. That will never, ever change. Chloe's lower lip trembled. Did Daddy leave because I made a mess with the glitter? Claire felt her heart crack in half. She pulled her daughter into a fierce hug. Oh, my sweet girl. No, this has absolutely nothing to do with you. You are perfect. This was a grown-up problem between me and Daddy. She told Chloe it wasn't her fault over and over again, silently reminding herself of the exact same thing. The first year was a grind. There were nights when Claire sat on the floor, surrounded by utility bills, crying out of sheer panic, wondering if she had ruined her life. But every morning, she woke up, put on her scrubs, and made Chloe Mickey Mouse pancakes. Life doesn't pause for your grief. It drags you forward, forcing you to survive. Mark was decent about his custody weekends, and the child support checks cleared. But he and Jessica didn't last. Word got around that Jessica transferred to a branch in another state. She had blown up her reputation for a guy who, at the end of the day, couldn't give her the ring or the lifestyle he promised. Claire didn't feel smug about it. She just felt a cynical pity. Two women had been conned by the exact same script. A year later, Claire passed her Pharmacy Technician Certification Board, PTCB, exam on the first try. She got a significant pay bump and the title of lead tech. The night she found out, she picked up a slice of confetti cake from a bakery. Chloe cheered and insisted they put a candle in it. As the tiny flame flickered, casting a warm glow over their cramped living room, Claire closed her eyes and made a wish. She wished for Chloe to grow up fiercely independent, and she promised herself that she would never shrink herself to fit into someone else's life again. When she blew out the candle, she wiped a happy tear from her cheek. She remembered how Mark used to promise to give her a comfortable life. Now she knew that a comfortable life wasn't something a man handed you on a silver platter. It was something you built out of late-night study sessions, budgeting apps, and sheer willpower. Over the next few years, Claire only saw Mark during custody drop-offs. He had lost his arrogant swagger. He was balding, drove a cheaper sedan, and spoke to Claire with a quiet, cautious respect. Once, they sat next to each other in the bleachers at Chloe's first-grade talent show. Chloe was on stage in a sparkly tutu, belting out a Disney song. Mark leaned over and whispered, "You've done a really great job with her, Claire." Claire kept her eyes on the stage and smiled. "She's a great kid." Mark paused. "You seem different. You're doing well." "I am," Claire said simply. The old Claire would have been terrified of being a divorced single mom, terrified of the stigma, terrified of failing. But she had walked through the fire and realized the scariest thing in the world isn't being alone. The scariest thing in the world is being trapped in a house with someone who lies to your face every single day. After the show, Chloe ran off the stage, grabbing Claire's hand and Mark's hand, practically vibrating with joy. "Did I do good?" "You were amazing, kiddo," Mark laughed. "The absolute best," Claire beamed. Looking at her daughter's glowing face, Claire felt a profound sense of peace. Her marriage had failed spectacularly, but her daughter's childhood wasn't broken. Because Claire refused to stay in a toxic environment, Chloe was growing up in two separate but peaceful homes. Driving back to their apartment that night, Chloe fell asleep in the back seat, her head leaning against the window. Claire drove down the highway, the radio playing softly. She thought back to that freezing night standing in the Oak Ridge stairwell, feeling like her life was over. Her old life was over. But from the ashes of it, she had built something real. Her apartment was small. She bought her clothes at Target, and she still clipped coupons. But there was no anxiety in her chest. There were no hushed phone calls, no phantom perfume smells, no gaslighting. There was only peace. When friends ask Claire if she regrets pulling the trigger on the divorce, she always shakes her head. Her only regret is that she didn't do it the first time she found the lipstick. She regrets letting society convince her that a man's financial provision gives him the right to disrespect her. She learned the hard way that the worst part of a bad marriage isn't the tight budget or the annoying habits. It's the psychological warfare. It's when someone looks you in the eye and tells you that you're crazy for seeing exactly what they're doing. It's when they weaponize your love for your child to keep you trapped as their safety net. Luckily, Claire cut the net. I'm Alex, and I share these late-night stories not to make you cynical about love, but to remind you of your own worth. The most dangerous lie women are sold is that we need a partner to survive, even if that partner is draining our soul. Claire used a stack of Venmo receipts, a pharmacy job, and pure grit to prove that true security doesn't come from a wedding ring. It comes from the absolute certainty that if the bottom falls out of your life tomorrow, you have the strength to rebuild it yourself. If you are sitting in the dark right now, wondering if you're crazy for suspecting the worst, remember Claire's story. Trust your gut. Do not let anyone convince you that demanding basic respect makes you difficult. Drop a like to send this to someone who might need the courage to look at their husband's phone bill. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had a gut feeling that turned out to be 100% right? Stay strong out there. See you in the next story.